problem confronting us now is, as Edward's question indicates, enormous due to the um, hyper individualization and atomization. That's not just the product of deindustrialization. I think that was being promoted relentlessly anyway, but I don't think the situation is quite as irreversible as some think. But let's get to Edward's actual question. How do you counter it? Now, this goes in several stages. And I don't think this just applies to Britain. I think that Britain is a particularly extreme case. But it also applies to the United States. It applies to most of Western Europe. See, what's needed is for the working class to discover the realities, the full implications of itself being working class. And what I mean by that is there has been a conscious effort on behalf of the bourgeoisie to erode the working class's knowledge of itself as a class. Now, most workers might understand that they are working class on some level. But as I always go back to Marx from The Poverty of Philosophy, where he's talking about the different levels of consciousness. Or, you could also use the example of Stalin in Anarchism or Socialism, when Stalin talks about the lag in consciousness, where material circumstances change and consciousness lags behind that. So what we've got at the moment is a situation where you have a working class in the imperialist countries, which, if we look at it by numbers, is of course bigger than ever, because working class, when it comes down to it, is a quite simple definition to it, which is, are you obliged to sell your labor to work, or do you have stores of capital that you could live off without working? Do you have to work wielding or maintaining or using the product of the means of production, or do you own the means of production or own some means of production? Now, I'm aware that there are others out there who use other definitions for this, but fundamentally that is the baseline definition of working class. I don't buy into the various cultural arguments that are used about which bit of the working class is the real working class. No. If you have to sell your labor to live, then you are one of the working class. Now, of course, there's different layers within that. There's what I would call productive and non-productive labor. Productive labor being those who are engaged in the extraction of raw materials, the production of commodities, and I would also argue myself the distribution of commodities. All of those workers exist within what is generally termed to be the group of workers who carry out productive labor, those whose work is directly related to the profit margins of capital. So, say if a group of miners go on strike and the companies can't get the raw resources out of the ground anymore, which causes a whole supply chain to judder to a halt, that's a group of workers with real industrial power. If factory workers who are producing commodities go on strike, that's real power. If truck drivers or train drivers go on strike, that's real power. Those people have a real impact upon the profits of capital, because they are the people who extract the resources, manufacture them into commodities, and distribute them to the point of sale. So the productive working class has been shrunk in the imperialist country, but it is still there. There's a hell of a lot of transport workers still. In fact, in many ways, that's a category of employee that's been added to. There's still a fair size of manufacturing employees. In fact, even in imperialist countries, it's reduced severely from where it was, but there's still enough there to make an impact if these people went on strike. And there's some resource extraction, but not a lot. But what there is a giant growth in the non-productive working class. And people get very upset when you start using this language, but let's not beat around the bush. Other than like the factory jobs that I've had, most of my working life has been spent in non-productive jobs, meaning you don't produce actual profit by your labor. You're, especially if you're in the public sector, you can argue justly that a lot of like public sector jobs do provide a social good, and that's true. But the most of the work that is done by the paper shufflers is non-productive, and the way in which we have to address this problem relates to two things. First of all, there needs to be a full realization amongst all the different layers of the working class of the implications of their class position, and that means to go back to Edouard's question about what the communist parties should do, is first step is to actually go and I start actively working in working class areas to try and recruit the advanced workers. Now, what do I mean by this? We're not aiming at this stage, not in the imperialist countries, for like mass membership parties. We can't do that at the moment because for a number of reasons. First of all, to have a communist party in the imperialist countries right now would take it having a solid foundation. At the moment, we are only at the very beginnings of being able to build a solid foundation. So, solid foundation is based on having a party of well-trained, advanced worker communist cadres that you recruit from the working class areas who go through a very often mentally strenuous program of political education and practical action to start building up the party. And in that process, a lot of the people you initially recruit will not be able to handle it and will drop out, because this is where we are right now. We're not even at the stage of, if we're going to make comparisons, like the Bolsheviks immediately prior to 1905. We're like back in the early day, if we're going to use the Russia comparison, we're back in like the early days of, Marxism in Russia, which is we're going from small agitational groups to actually building up to like small party organizations with a decent presence in working class areas. That's our aim. And so you build a cadre-based organization. The ideal thing you want is you want a lot of, you want a decent number of, to use, you can call them cadres, you can call them organic intellectuals of the working class, who are, I would say, knowledgeable and trusted voices in their community and workplaces. They don't necessarily, a worker communist doesn't actually necessarily have to have a union job, or I should say an elective union position. It has to be somebody who has actually knowledge and respect amongst his or her fellow workers. And the reason why I would say what we must aim to do is build up a solid organization, although necessarily at this stage it will be a relatively small organization, is so that when crisis evolves and the masses move into action, we have enough people in the right areas who can make an intervention when there is an upsurge in militancy, that communists can hope to influence that in the right direction. So one of the problems that the left in the imperialist countries has is that because it's run by it largely consists of opportunists, Trotskyites, and other kinds of people who, even the sincere ones, want to skip over like several stages and just immediately run to, I don't know, the revolution seems from Les Miserables or something. The truth is that right now, we have to work hard to find the advanced workers, recruit them, and educate them. It's a difficult and sometimes unrewarding task, but that's what the job that has fallen to us. See, what we need to overcome is not only the legacy of atomization due to deindustrialization, but also the poisonous legacies of social democracy. And that's like a huge thing. The poisonous legacies of social democracy, which includes not just like the legacy of the Labour Party, but also the legacy of like the revisionist communist parties. So all of that needs to be overcome, which is why I say we're in the very early building stages in the imperialist countries right now. We shouldn't expect to build mass organizations overnight. We shouldn't expect the working class to turn to us immediately. We should expect and should work towards advanced workers coming in, getting organized and educated, and being ready to start building local Communist Party branches in their working in their neighborhoods, oriented around themselves and other advanced workers. Again, communist parties at this stage in the West are going to be small. They're going to go through. We're going to burn through a fair amount of people who don't have the necessary level of commitment, who don't have the necessary patience, and who won't learn it. This is a difficult and at least medium-term to long-term job that we're engaged in to, again, train a new generation of cadres. Don't all have to be from the younger generation, but it would help if a lot of them were, who will put down roots for the party and start building organizations inside working class areas where no one sought to organize for decades. That's the challenge at this stage. And it's important that we're realistic about that. And it's important to pick up on something that Sid said in the comments, which is, I'll just read Sid's comment out, which is that the Western proletariat needs to be completely disabused of the idea that any change can be addressed through the ballot box. Yeah, that time's gone. That time's gone. There was a time earlier on in the history of American capitalism, and there was a time earlier on in the history of British imperialism, where due to largely the unique combination of circumstances that occurred after 1917, with living with the legacy of the October Revolution, where the parliamentary process appeared to deliver something. That was a unique combination of events which is now gone, and the bourgeoisie rapidly found ways, as I've said many times, to go around to get around the fact that the working class had the vote. And you don't get to vote out the ruling class. Never. They and their networks rule, no matter who is in Downing Street or who is in the White House or who is in the Élysée Palace. And many workers do understand that. I mean, we Marxists sometimes get down on our own efforts and think that the working class will never move. But the working class does understand. Many workers do understand instinctively. They might not have all the Marxist-Leninist language. They might not have drawn all the full realizations yet. But there is a very widespread realization amongst the working class here that the politicians don't matter, that there's forces who control things that they don't see, who are never on a ballot paper, who are never interviewed on television. And now, unfortunately, because workers reach that level of understanding, but there's no Communist Party around them to show them the way forward, a lot of them fall into just cynicism, and a lot of them fall into the trap of, like, Alex Jones style conspiracy stuff. But the knowledge is there because workers know and can see that their life in their community and life for them in their workplace gets getting harder and harder, and that's been the case no matter who's in power. So there is an understanding of the nature of the beast there amongst the working class. What's not there is a knowledge of the full implications of that yet. And the full implications of that can only be drawn by the active intervention of the Communist Party. A worker can go a long way on his or her own in terms of, as Lenin analyzed, spontaneous development. You can go an awful long way with that. But the knowledge that you have to not only take to the streets, or to use the 1905 revolution analogy, to actually form workers' councils to govern whole towns, cities, areas, countries through interconnected workers' councils, but also to draw the full implications of that spontaneous movement, which is that if workers' councils are formed, then the authority of the capitalist state needs to be destroyed, and the capitalist state itself needs to be destroyed. One of the reasons I talk about the need to overcome the legacy of social democracy is that I think, particularly amongst the older generations, less so amongst the younger generations, there is still something of an expectation that reform can still come through the state. That's the poisonous legacy of social democracy. So what the working class needs to understand, and I think many workers are closer to this than we think, it's just that they haven't joined up all the dots yet, is that the current state is not ours, as Lenin argued in State and Revolution, cannot be wielded by us. It is filled with people, and it's staffed by people who are our enemies, and it needs to be smashed and destroyed and replaced with something new, which we will construct. And that realization can only properly come through the intervention of communists. And that's why we have to be in the stage right now of recruiting and getting as many advanced workers into our ranks as possible, to have them politically trained and be ready to take that understanding out to the wider working class. So it's to finalize my answer to Edward's question, it's a question of education, organization, reaching the working class where they live and where they work, and getting them to join the dots together. All the instinctive realizations that workers have about things, that they might not be able to be fully aware of the implications of the things that they observe, but it's the job of the communists to bring that realization to them. And at the moment, we're in the potentially long and difficult process of recruiting and organizing amongst the working class in a way that's not been done in the British case, 70 plus years.